So let's check in on Manchester United's pre-season tour, which seems to be grabbing the headlines more than most. We have Andy Mitten, editor of United We Stand, on the line. Afternoon, evening, morning, Andy, wherever you are. I think you're over there.
I am. I'm in Miami ahead of the final game, the final of the 5 games that Manchester United have played in the United States. They're playing Spanish minnows, Real Madrid this evening, and then I fly back to Europe like the team and on to Bavaria, the final game of the pre-season in Munich against Bayern on Sunday.
We are right on course for the third season Jose Mourinho syndrome meltdown. This seems to be going horribly, looking in from afar on a whole host of different levels. What's wrong with him? He's in a terrible mood. Every time I hear him, he's moaning about something. He's coming across terribly. He's taking shots at anyone who's coming vaguely within his firing line. This is almost self-sabotage.
Yeah, he looks miserable. He looked miserable throughout the whole tour. I think the only time I saw him smile was when he said that he congratulated his daughter on her graduation, and he doesn't help himself. Things are not that bad at Manchester United. He's complaining about things which other managers could also complain about. But whereas Pep Guardiola or Jurgen Klopp accentuated the positives of their players in the World Cup finals, Mourinho saw it as a negative. And he's been pretty consistent, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating as a Manchester United fan, but also as a journalist, because he really could be helping himself. When I saw Jurgen Klopp meeting with Liverpool fans in Ann Arbor, Michigan on Friday, and contrasted that with Jose Mourinho complaining a day later in the same city, I felt that the tone of a football club comes from the manager. And I've spoken to lots of the players on this tour. There's no real problem. Right. The players are fine. Right. The players are looking forward to next season. They miss their families. They want to get home. They've been on the road for 18 days. And Jose Mourinho could be saying, we finished second, we're looking at bridging the gap next year. I've kept Fellaini, which I wanted. De Gea stayed. Fred, and I spoke to Fred yesterday. He's an interesting guy. Fred has come in. Okay, he's not got all the players that he wanted, but which manager gets everything that they wanted? There is still time. United are still trying to sign a central defender, and when the fans see Mourinho, they just see a guy moaning all the time, and it just doesn't look good. It needs to be managed far, far better. Most Manchester United fans who I regularly survey, and they tend to be the match-going fans, they still want Mourinho in charge. They know there's no obvious plan B apart from anything else. But he's not been a disaster as Manchester United manager. His first season was a success. Last season faded badly. Some of the games at the end of the season were atrocious. But United still finished second with the highest points total since Sir Alex Ferguson stepped down 5 years ago. That can be built upon. I think you can argue the case for 7 or 8 Manchester United players performing much better this season than they did last season. You could also say that they're restricted by the type of football that Mourinho's teams plays. But Paul Pogba, we want to see him playing for United as he plays for France. Anthony Martial. Marcus Rashford should continue his improvement. Victor Lindelof was excellent in the World Cup for Sweden. And I think there are reasons for positives, but you're just getting this stream of negativity from Jose Mourinho, and I don't think it helps anybody.
Just to illustrate that stream of negativity you're talking about, just have a listen to this as one random exchange.
With the squad as you have now, would you be confident of challenging for the title next year, as it stands now, with no more new players?
I don't answer to your question.
So really that is answering the question in the most childish way imaginable. And then I enjoyed this one as well. So they've got Leicester in 10 days' time, followed by Reading, followed by Spurs. So here's Jose, taking the most negative line possible of thinking when he's talking about that Reading game. Obviously he's missing a number of frontline players, as we know.
Of course I'm not happy. Of course I'm not happy to have just a few players. When I look to Brighton on the second game, I don't think they have any player that is not doing a very good pre-season with lots of matches and trainings all together. So of course, against Leicester and Brighton, the situation is not amazing for us.
Yeah, because Reading don't have like World Cup winners literally in their squad. Like Paul Clement would absolutely trade with Jose Mourinho. He's talking about Reading here. I mean, there's Manchester United fans in touch with us and they're just so sick of this guy's relentless moaning. This is the second game against Reading. And like, I mean, you mentioned Ferguson there. What was Ferguson if nothing else but a bit of fight and a bit of roll up our sleeves and we're going to do this and no excuses? I mean, subconsciously or otherwise, Mourinho's just offering up his players one excuse after another here. I mean, I just find this relentlessly infuriating. I can only imagine what it's like to support this team and care about this team.
Yeah, it's actually Brighton who the second game is, not Reading.
Brighton, excuse me. I reckon Brighton would swap with Jose Mourinho losing Paul Pogba for a few weeks of pre-season too if they could have him for the United game.
I think they absolutely would. You didn't have to drive 75 minutes across LA to listen to him say that. I've got to try and do my job out here. And I drove across and he spoke for 8 minutes and it was just like his world was caving in. And I'm thinking, you know, when I've done interviews with him, he's been personable, he's been charming, he's been charismatic. And there's no reason why he can't be this time. He hasn't had all the players come in that he wants and he's missing players, but Tottenham are missing players. You can, as you said, he's gone for the most negative line and you can do that in any walk of life. But there are also positives attached to Manchester United. The start of the season could be much, much worse in terms of their opponents.
Yeah.
When David Moyes arrived, he faced Manchester City, Chelsea and Liverpool within the first 5 games. Leicester at home, Reading or Brighton in the second game. Tottenham at home. Tottenham are missing just as many players as Manchester United. The start of the season could be more challenging. The games are not coming thick and fast either. There's no Champions League qualifier, as there has been in previous seasons, partly because he led Manchester United to second in the league last year. And I am surprised at how negative he has been. I'm surprised at how unhappy he looks. I can understand some of his frustrations in that he's not got all the players that he wants to be working with, but it's always the same post-World Cup when Manchester United come on the tours. Yeah. If they're going to take the money from the sponsors in the United States, then they're going to want their pound of flesh. And that includes Mourinho, who is normally box office, coming over. When Jose Mourinho then says, I wouldn't have paid money to watch this game, I spoke to fans on the street in Ann Arbor on Saturday, and that quote was seeping through to them. And they're like, they don't want our money then. They don't want us to come back. You can bet your bottom dollar that people at Manchester United do not agree with that line, what he's saying. Now, Mourinho is entitled to go off on with his own opinions, and that can also make him so attractive to listen to because he's the opposite of a dull manager who just talks in cliches. But is it really that bad? I just don't believe it is. I speak to the players. I write about Manchester United every single day. And I just do not think it is that bad. This is not a team or club brinkering on the verge of liquidation. Yeah. These are relatively minor issues. There are still very, very good players at that football club.
Yeah.
And things could have been much, much worse. De Gea could be in Madrid now. Fellaini, who the manager really likes, he could have left by now. There could have been injuries. Paul Pogba could have broken his leg in the World Cup final. But, you know, for all the negatives that he goes on about, it could be much, much worse. And I don't get why he is so negative. Unless he's trying to make this point to the club that I want more. But the club could push back from that and say, well, wait a minute. You want another centre-half? You bought 2 centre-halves in the last 2 years for £30 million each. We have backed you. You have spent a lot of money. Now, fans, and there's an element of Manchester United fans, and this is quite a new thing, they're never, ever, ever happy. They always want new players. And as soon as a new player signs, they want another new player. They get a massive hit out of signing a player. And the club, I think, gets swayed by that. And I don't think it is the answer either, because in recent years we've seen world-class players join Manchester United. Angel Di Maria, Radamel Falcao, Bastian Schweinsteiger. It hasn't worked. And sometimes the most successful football teams come out of a team spirit, of young players coming through at Manchester United. You know, players like John O'Shea were really important to Manchester United. And they might have not generated a huge number of clicks on social media when they came through the ranks and made the debut, but they were still really, really important.
Yeah.
And I think the club have reined it in a little bit. They spent a lot of money in the last few seasons, but they're up against this wall of fans saying, oh, why aren't we signing Messi? Why aren't we signing Ronaldo? I'm exaggerating here, but there's a huge body of these people who exist, who are constantly demanding new signings.
Yeah.
And actually, I'll give you another positive. Andreas Pereira is a very talented young footballer. I spoke to him at length on Sunday. He's been Manchester United's best player this pre-season. Alexis Sanchez, he's played really well on this pre-season. The positives. Sanchez didn't do enough last season. He should be one of the top 3 players in the Premier League if he starts well and plays well. So there's already a lot of very, very good players at that club.
It's funny you mentioned Sanchez. The only time I saw Mourinho mention Sanchez over the last number of days was to ask how will Sanchez feel surrounded by some of these players that he's playing with, which is just another one of his lines. Like I saw Luke Edwards and James Ducker had a piece today in The Independent where they were talking, or in The Telegraph rather, where they were talking about players increasingly on eggshells, that even those close to Mourinho have noticed that increasingly he's more than happy to criticise them publicly, and nobody likes that, and it's damaging morale. Like he names Valencia captain and then literally within a day or two is unhappy with Valencia's weight. The Martial situation seems like it's just gone, like it's done. I mean, Martial's flown home, his partner's having had a child, and he's just like not coming back out. You know, it's just slightly odd. So like the relationship between him and the players must be a question. And that's where I wanted to ask you about Rui Faria, who's obviously gone. So, I mean, to what extent do we understand, was Faria a sounding board for him? Was he someone to maybe massage relations, to maybe curb some of Jose's more explosive tendencies?
I think your last 2 points are accurate. He was a foil for him. Maybe he did curb some of his more explosive tendencies, but he wasn't a conduit between the players and the manager like previous assistant managers have been.
Right.
If the treble winners had a problem, then they went to Steve McLaren or Brian Kidd before him, or in later seasons they went to Mike Phelan.
Yeah.
And Mike Phelan or Kiddo could go to the manager and say, "Listen, Gaffer, I know you might not like this, but you know, the manager really should just have a couple of days off." And that worked, and it didn't work the same way with Faria. I've spoken to several players. I don't think there's a massive problem.
Okay.
I think there's an issue when, and when I say spoken to several, I'm on about 8 or 9.
Yeah.
I've been on this full tour. I know lots of them. I'm not saying they're happy when Luke Shaw is called out in public, because they're not. But if Antonio Valencia comes back and he's not as fit as he should be, I think his manager should say something to him. Should he do it in public and then name him as captain? I agree, it's totally baffling. I don't even think Antonio Valencia should be captain. He can't speak English very well. He's a good lad, he's a good player, but I think there are better candidates for Manchester United's captaincy than Valencia. Players don't like being called out in public, but players are far more powerful than they've ever been. They're surrounded by people who say yes to them and air their gripes to journalists and say, yeah, it could be better for him, and someone has got to say no to these lads.
Yeah.
Someone has got to say, you're not playing.
Yeah.
There's 26 players there, only 11 of them can start games. Football lends itself to disappointment, and that someone is the manager of the club. He's got to deliver the bad news. And I think as squads have grown bigger, as players know that they have other options, and the way that the contracts are, they have more power. They have to deal with a lot more of that than they used to. I'm on about the manager now. Yeah.
It's funny, actually, you mentioned Luke Shaw. He did an interview a couple of days ago where he talked about Mourinho, and this is just weird, Mourinho being far nicer to him privately than he is publicly. So privately he'll get text messages from Mourinho saying, you could be really great here if you work hard, and he's very encouraging behind the scenes, and then publicly far less so, as we know, which just struck me as strange. Shaw seems to have kind of put a bit of work into his fitness, and he was talking about photos of him over the summer in Dubai where he was clearly overweight, and the social media backlash getting to him. Now, he's talked about things like he's cut out fizzy drinks, he's sleeping more, and he's eating a lot better. So we're not quite into the marginal gains territory just there. I mean, that seems like 101 stuff to me. But anyway, at least he's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've yet to see a big improvement in terms of his performances.
Right.
Shaw was excellent pre-season in his second year, 2015. I don't think he's done enough this pre-season. He's had a chance, and this is another potential positive. With all the players missing, players like Luke Shaw get to play all the time. And I would like to see him do well at Manchester United. And he might do well. The club don't want to sell him. And Mourinho is more positive with him in private. And you could say the same about Andreas Pereira, who has taken his chance, who has played very well. He was criticised for leaving last year when he went to Valencia on loan. And yet Jose Mourinho stayed in touch with him and sent him texts throughout the season. Now, there's two sides to the argument, and there are allowed to be two sides to an argument. From Pereira's perspective last year, he did well pre-season. He wasn't in any of the opening 3 matchday squads, and he wanted to play football. So he went to Valencia, who are a great club. I completely get all that. But I also get Jose Mourinho saying, well, I've lost a player who could have featured here, because managers always want more options for themselves, but that's not necessarily in the best interests of their players. And I feel that it may all unwind with Manchester United. Jose Mourinho may have this third season breakdown that we've seen at other clubs, and I saw it firsthand in Spain. I was writing about him all the time in Spain, and it was so unedifying to watch that. But I also feel that if he wins his first 4 league games of the season, all of this will be forgotten about. But there is a backlash waiting to happen. He does have the support still of the majority of Manchester United fans, but they want to see an improvement in the style of play. I don't think anyone really expects United to win the league next year, but I think they'd be very disappointed if the team went out of Europe as limply as they did against Sevilla last year, and that they were so far behind Manchester City, because there wasn't even a title race last year. And that made for a real flat second half of the season. Yeah, it
sure did. So last question, I guess, to round out this whole conversation. We've talked about the messaging, clearly, I guess, to some extent for the fans, and he's certainly deciding to go public once again this year with the players in a big way. Ed Woodward is clearly, and the Manchester United board, they're clearly the target of some of his ire here. He outed them. He said, I gave them 5 names. He's like, I'll be lucky to get 1 at the moment. Talked about wanting a winger and centre half. So, you read dispatches and they say, sources say that he still has the backing of the board. You sort of mentioned that earlier in the conversation, that they don't see anyone else out there. The fans don't see anyone else out there. I mean, he is very publicly pointing over there at Ed Woodward for everybody to see and say, look, this guy's not done such a great job this summer. And, Ed Woodward got plenty of criticism early on in his tenure for not nailing down transfers. So how has that gone down? And what's the Woodward-Mourinho relationship like? Do we know?
Well, from Woodward's perspective, there's not a big problem there.
Okay.
Mourinho has called out the board because he wanted more players than he's got in, and he's very frustrated with that. I saw both of them yesterday in Miami. Woodward was very, very busy. He's trying to nail a player. He's trying to get the deal done. I think he would have much rather things went better from his perspective. I know Manchester United didn't agree with the transfer window being brought forward because they feel European teams have an advantage because they can buy and sell players until the end of August. Look, it's not ideal, but if I ask anyone listening to this or watching this, is your relationship with your boss ideal all the time? Do you agree with everything that your boss does all the time? And I'm not convinced that 100% of people would say yes. One problem Manchester United have.
None of us call our bosses out publicly on Facebook. I mean, we're not doing press conferences, admittedly, but it's the public aspect of this. If him and Woodward are killing each other behind the scenes, that's fine. That's part of the gig.
Yeah. Look, what do you expect when you sign Mourinho? Manchester United fans wanted him in overwhelming numbers, and I wasn't one of them. But now he's a Manchester United manager. I will back him. What do you expect? He's been like this throughout his career. This is what he does, for better or for worse. And normally, for better means winning trophies. He's always pushing and pushing and pushing. And if he's got a huge issue with the way that the club are handling things, all I know is what he's saying publicly. But I know privately United don't have a massive issue with him. But I know that when he's calling people out publicly, they feel that could be much better managed.
Yeah, I would think so. This is starting to simmer away very nicely, and we haven't even had the first game yet. Andy, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the trip out there.
Thanks. Good to talk to you.